All right, we are now live. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to this LF Decentralized Trust member webinar with Trust over IP. It's a very exciting webinar today, and we're looking forward to it. We're just gonna give everybody a minute or two to join, and then we're gonna get started. And while we wait, I would encourage everybody to use the chat button and say hello and tell us where you're zooming in from. And once again, thank you for joining. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever in the world you're zooming in from. And welcome to this LF Decentralized Trust webinar with Trust over IP. We're just going to wait for another minute to give everybody a chance to join, and then we are going to get started. Hi, Brett. Hi into Florida. Good to have you with us. Oops. All right, so we are going to get started. Hello again, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where in the world you're zooming in from, and welcome to this LF Decentralized Trust webinar with Trust over IP. My name is Tomasz, and I'm an ecosystem manager at LF Decentralized Trust. And today I'm going to have the chance to take you through some housekeeping and also introduce you to our panelists. First, I would like to emphasize that everybody is welcome in our community, and we are striving to create a safe and welcoming environment for everybody. So please read our code of conduct when interacting with other people on this webinar and broader in the community as well. You can find our code of conduct on our website and on our wiki as well. All of the LF Decentralized Trust webinars are held under the Linux Foundation antitrust policy, and you can find the full policy on this link on our website and on our wiki. This session is being recorded, and you will be able to download the recording from our webinar library as well as our webinar YouTube channel, along with the slides. So in case oh, what happened now? Not sure. Well, apologies to everyone there. I see that we still have people with us, so hopefully we didn't lose anybody. But yeah, well, really apologies for that.
I got kicked out too.
Okay. I didn't lose the connection, but there we go. I'm glad that we are still here, and I don't think we lost the participant. Anyway, apologies for that. And as mentioned, we will always be able to return to works from now on. All right, so the last thing I would like to say is also to stay active to get the most out of the webinar, and the more interactions we have, the better experience for everyone, provided we stay still online. So feel free to use the raise your hand button, and we will unmute you so you can speak up and ask the questions of the panelists at the end. You're also welcome to use the chat button and the Q&A box for the people that are would prefer to just chat with us, and we will address these questions at the end as well. And now, without further ado, I would like to turn over this recording, this session to Judith, who's the Director of Strategic Engagement and Trust over IP. Judith, over to you.
Thank you, Tomas. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon from around the world. So happy that you are all here. As he said, I am the Director of Strategic Engagement for the Trust over IP Foundation. Trust over IP, often called ToIP, is a joint development fund project within the Linux Foundation. We are an international organization with over 500 corporate and individual members in our collaborative community. Our mission is to provide a robust, common set of standards and a complete architecture for internet scale digital trust. It's a clear mission, but it's not at all easy. And that's why it takes a collaborative community to get it right. And so here at the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust Organization, we are working together to create specifications, recommendations, white papers, guides to assist both governments and organizations embarking on creation of interoperable digital trust ecosystems at scales. So today I have been joined by three of our steering committee members. I'd like to introduce them at this point. We have Drummond Reed, who is the Director of Trust Services at GEN. He has been the co-editor of the W3C Decentralized Identifier DID Specification 1.0 and the co-author of the 2021 Manning publication, Self-Sovereign Identity, which was and is still kind of the definitive book on decentralized and self-sovereign identity. We also have Karla McKenna. She is the Managing Director and Head of Standards for Glyph, and she is the Product Manager for the Verifiable Legal Entity Identifier, known as the VLAI, and author of the VLEI Governance Ecosystem Framework. Welcome, Karla. And last but not least, we have Wenjing Chu, the Senior Director of Technology Strategy for FutureWay Technologies, Inc. He is the lead author of the Trust over IP Trust Spanning Protocol Draft Specification, the ToIP Technical Architecture Draft Specification, and he is a board member and on the TAC of the Open Wallet Foundation, as well as being on our steering committee. So I would like to welcome all of them. And starting with Wenjing, let me give the first question to you, which is, as the co-chair of our AI and Metaverse Task Force, you deal with trust issues regarding AI and deepfakes every day. Can you help explain the problem and why it's important?
Yeah, thank you, Judith. So I'm going to start with some example and hopefully frame the problem in more broadly and see how the trust over IP work can contribute to helping us solve those problems. So I think we are clearly in a very in a crisis mode, and I'm quoting this report from The Economist magazine on the issue of October 24th that has a subtitle which says, "This crisis has only just begun." And I would add that it also has been a long time coming. So the fake information has been really a impediment and a challenge in the internet for a long time. And we've seen this being played along for many years. And so AI and the arrival of the AI technologies simply made this into much more of a crisis mode. And as evidence of that, I think the same report also mentioned some statistics about such a fraud and the schemes have been widely propagating around the world. And specifically, the case that the report mentioned to about people on Zoom meetings, just like we're having today, where the attendants and the speakers in the meeting are not real. So they are created, using both voice and video technology to mimic or deceive people who believe who they are. And the scale of the problem is, I think, beyond what most people have been thinking for such a scheme, right? So in this case, I think I want to highlight that Cambodia, as reported in the article, this is a country of more than 60 million people and has a scam industry being estimated as the size of almost half of its GDP. So we are really seeing this problem out of hand. And one of the conclusions I would intuitively get to is that this is not a small problem. It is not a sort of a temporary problem. I think it shows to us that whatever trust infrastructure we had been relying on in the past are not working. And I think, there's a more colorful way to say it. It is like the emperor has no clothes, right? And we've also been seeing that many of the proposed solutions, for example, detection software, including, watermarks to these AI generated content, for example, can be also defeated. And so that's a huge challenge we're facing. If we want to see AI technology really become very useful and beneficial to all of us, I think we need a solution. So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide. I'm going to say that the verifiable authenticity is the kind of a foundation that we need to think about, not as a patchwork, as a band-aid to current system, but really rethink the system from the basic principles and build it systematically, the same way we built internet in back in the early days, right? And so we need to think about that in that particular way and bring in these trust and the fundamental property of verifiable authenticity into such an architecture. And so how do we do that? I'm going to hand over to Drummond.
Thank you so much. So trust over IP, as may know or may not know on this call, has been long known for our dual stack. And by dual stack, I mean it incorporates both the technical side of a stack, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but also the governance side of a stack, and what's required with regards to governance to create digital trust ecosystems that are trustworthy. Drummond, can you just take us through the elevator pitch on why the stack is designed the way it is, on both the governance and the technical halves of the stack?
Sure. And to do that, I'll use a series of slides that are on our website under the Trust over IP model heading that we developed. This is the third generation of how we explain the model, but the core model has been the same since we were started in 2020. Obviously, if we're doing a internet scale architecture for digital trust, we have to have technology. But as Judith just explained, the first core principle of the development of the Trust over IP stack was that technology alone does not produce trust. You can only produce trust between people and organizations and the devices we use if there is governance that's included. So from the outset, we've said the stack has to be this two-sided or dual stack. Now, as Wenjing explained, we need to build something that's robust and scalable, very much like the internet is. And so we, from the outset, said it needs to be a 4-layer stack, just like the internet's a 4-layer stack. And Wenjing will talk more about the key reason for layer 2 in terms of trust spanning. But the other key thing is these 4 layers of course, they are technology protocol layers, but they extend into governance because each of them involves human governance to ensure that the components operating at that layer are trustworthy. Now, the next key concept is that governance is not a static thing. As the internet's evolved, as the technologies evolved, and the threats evolve, and as you just heard from Wenjing with AI, the threats are going to evolve faster and be harder to deal with. We need governance that can assess those threats, put in place the necessary policies, but then reassess constantly as things are going, and be able to update that governance and tie it into each of these 4 layers. So that's why we talk about a define and run cycle for the governance frameworks needed. Now, the other key concept behind all this is TrustRP is a model. It's a technology model and a governance model, and then it is applied in digital trust ecosystems. We'll just shorten that in this webinar to the term ecosystems. But whenever we say that, we're talking about digital trust ecosystems that consists of actors running this stack and interacting according to the policies of the governance framework they have for that ecosystem. Every one of those ecosystems is an instance of the trust over IP model. And as those instances start to happen out there in the real world, and we'll give you several examples in this webinar, we are learning from those and taking that learning back into the model, and those ecosystems are in turn using those learnings to improve what they're doing. So what this is going to lead to, and the whole goal of what we're doing here, is interconnected and interoperable digital trust ecosystems at internet scale. So you might look at one of those and go, well, I can see national ecosystems, but then think industry-specific ecosystems, whether it's finance or healthcare or travel or supply chain, and then start to think, well, actually, ecosystems can contain ecosystems. We call that the ecosystem of ecosystems pattern. A great example in the European Union Digital Identity Wallets Initiative, it is an ecosystem of 27 member states, each of which is their own ecosystem. And within those, you're going to have ecosystems that are industry specific or regional or local, all the way down to cities and towns and schools. So the whole point of the TrustRP model is to enable technical interoperability between the ecosystems, and then the maximum amount of digital trust that can be transferred in terms of credentials or verifiable data between those ecosystems, depending on their policies and their governance frameworks. So a more detailed illustration, and we want to emphasize it's just a conceptual illustration of the major components in the stack, is this diagram here. Again, all of what you've seen here is in a progression on our website under the TrustRP model. And you'll see here, layer 1, what we call trust support, are the key elements you need for cryptographically secure processing. Verifiable identifiers, where you can cryptographically know or prove who the security and authenticity of a connection. And then trust registries are where authorization information is stored, so you can query an ecosystem to learn about its policies and what actors are authorized to take what actions inside that. Wenjing will talk more about a trust spanning layer at the at layer 2. That enables all different forms of trust tasks. You see several examples here. Credential exchange is one of the most discussed, but it's only one of many different trust tasks that then can be all called by applications, whether it's people or organizations or the Internet of Things, whether it's the what we call the trust triangle for credential exchange, any forms of wallets and agents, all of those things can operate on top of the stack. So, and you also see over here some of the key actors and roles involved with governance. And lastly, this is just a high-level list of some of the key topics covered on what we call the TrustRP governance meta model. essentially a checklist and a model for all the things that a particular ecosystem may need to cover in its policies for the actors in that ecosystem. And the last point I'll make here is you saw a lot of terms on that diagram. And in the space of digital identity and trust, especially in decentralized architectures, turns out that terms and definitions are extraordinarily important. You need to be very precise about your terms. So we have a working group called a Concept and Terminology. I'm one of the co-chairs of that working group. And for 4 years, we have been developing not just a glossary for these terms, and now has over 500 terms in it, but the tooling so that we can evolve this glossary. It's GitHub-based glossary, and you can not only just make web references to these terms, you can use a tool that was originally developed at the Decentralized Identity Foundation called SpecUp to actually include references to those terms in specifications and white papers that will even produce pop-ups on the web, pop-up definitions like you see on Wikipedia. All that tooling is part of what we have that's available now to all LF Decentralized Trusts or any other Linux Foundation projects. So you can see it today in operation at glossary at trustofp.org. And if you're interested in using more about that, we would just get in touch with us. So Judith, back over to you. You're on mute.
Just to be clear for everybody who's here from another LFDT project or even a project outside of LF, we developed this tool so that others could utilize it and use documentation in their own documentation and their own specifications, and so that you can see how different words are used in different specifications. So please do reach out to us if it's helpful to you. And so we're going to jump over now to Wenjing, who is the chair of our task force that is leading the what I'd like to call the keystone of our ToIP stack, which we call the Trust Spanning Protocol. And so we often abbreviate this as TSP. And just to point out how important glossaries are, noting that in the EU Digital Identity Wallet Initiative, the abbreviation TSP means Trust Service Provider. So when we say TSP, we're talking about Trust Spanning Protocol. It's used in different ways in different places. And this is why glossaries are so important. That glossary, we could then show how the initials TSP are used in 2 different ways, in 2 different contexts. And this is very needed when we talk about ecosystems of ecosystems, because each ecosystem may have slightly different vocabulary and slightly different meanings for things. So with that, we'll move into this keystone of our ToIP stack, which is the Trust Spanning Protocol. Wenjing, the task force recently published its first implementers draft, and I think there's even a reference architecture ready to be banged on at Open Wallet Foundation. Can you explain why the TSP is so important to interoperability? And then also, how does it enable the higher level, the layer 3 tasks that we call trust task protocols?
Yes, thank Judith. Yes, so the Trust Spanning Protocol, we have an implementers draft in the Trust of IP GitHub. There's also a open source implementation that's hosted by the Open Wallet Foundation, also under the project name TSP. As Drummond mentioned earlier, the principal way we're thinking about this problem is that the same philosophy I think we follow as the original designs of IP or internet architecture, and in that, the very important part of conclusion is that in order for the network to scale or to reach billions of people and devices around the world, we need to have interoperability and scaling in a particular layer that allow the technology to really develop both beneath of it and higher above it, but also maintain interoperability, right? So over the system interoperability among different devices, between different regions, countries, but also over a long time. So time scale and be able to evolve, all of that is rely on this particular layer. And in the internet, that is the internet protocol, or usually we call that layer 3 actually in its scheme of things. But this is the layer we're talking about. Its role is spanning the entire network. So one of the I think most important thing the TSP design and trust over IP stack overall trying to do is to maintain same kind of a scalability like the internet, but add security or add trust of it. And we'll see what are those the content of that really mean. So it is secure, it is scale, it can have fundamentally better security and trust than the system we have today, right? The system we have today is developed over time, little by little, on top of the internet architecture, but without really I think a very well thought through of the trust and the threat landscape we're seeing today. So with that, if you can see the layering over here, I think the next slide, Judith, would show more visually how this would work. And so you can see the layer 2 allows us to have an interoperability layer that provides same kind of connectivity like internet, but also provide the 3 key components we think are the fundamental and the minimum requirement for really higher level, stronger level of trust. And that is authenticity, confidentiality, and metadata privacy. I'm going to talk a little bit about all 3 things. So authenticity really means a stronger sense, like we would know who we are talking to. And then if if we go back to the original example I shared in the beginning of this webinar, the reason that a fraud of $25 million worth of it happened is because we've been deceived that the people attending a virtual meeting are the people we know, right? Those are our colleagues, in that particular example, the CFO and the team that this particular individual work with every day. And so that will be a spoof of identity, which is really one of the problems that we need solve with verifiable authenticity. So there are many of these stronger schemes and designs in the identity space allow us to be able to verify and assert and have very strong sense of authenticity for that communication to happen. So that's one component. The second is confidentiality, which in the very, in the past, we always get used to the so-called encryption scheme, but most of the encryption scheme in use today, even though they negotiate the keys using public key cryptography, that the end result typically is a session, and the session is quite weak, I think, in terms of a lot of I think trust properties we want to have, and especially in the use of symmetric keys and allowing those symmetric keys then to be able to spoof and left with room for those problems. In addition to that, I think most of that key management is based on a tree structure, which is very cumbersome, and that's why they are not widely used. That's the reason I think we had to go into only use them, in some areas in larger systems. And secondly is that particular key chain of trust are very fragile. any. So we've seen numerous cases where a weak component in that chain got broken, and therefore the entire system's security and trust level really deteriorate. So that's some of the examples of why we would need a stronger sense of that as well. Finally, I think when we talk about trust, I think trust is really fundamentally bigger problem or bigger scope than just purely security, because we not only want the system to be secure, but we also want to know like the privacy for the end user. We want to the benefit or the values of both participants in the communication, right, be preserved. And that usually means, we've been picking this name of privacy. And privacy specifically in addition to confidentiality is the area of a metadata privacy. So that is the privacy that a communication and metadata such as our TCP headers, our sessions, our observable things that from the network and by the third party can be minimized and controlled so that they cannot be used as a wide-scale, a large-scale correlation attack to identify and basically know more and more information about the communication. So those are the three basic high-level things we highlight in the protocol. And I think they form this minimum need for a high level of trust, and that serves as the spanning protocol. So with that, we can build more and more sophisticated, we call trust tasks, or even higher layer, there will be applications. And typically the trust task will be the functions like we can recognize and can be readily reused. So for instance, credential exchange is one of the very common use cases, and these can be standardized and readily reused. We can do proofs, we can do signatures, agreement signing, right? And so consent delegation. So many examples of these can be considered as a trust task that the different groups and standard bodies can optimize and formally standardize them. And so those are the examples of the trust task. And the way that a trust task can build on layer 2 and the transpanning layer is that once you have this, we call trust relationship established based on a very strong digital identifier, a lot of the sort of the difficult and bootstrap problems are solved. So for instance, when if we wanted to trust the messaging or trust the data sharing on top of the trust spanning protocol, these higher level trust tasks only need to deal with that its own domain. It doesn't have to worry about identifiers, and they don't have to worry about the three things we've been talking about, right? Authenticity, confidentiality, and the privacy. And that allows the whole ecosystem to be much more scalable, much more efficient. We don't have to reinvent this solution to them one by one, but also give us a huge sense of interoperability possibilities. So this is the reason how the internet architecture was designed, and it's also the reason why we designed in this way. And before I end, I want to just highlight one of the key, I think, problems that we would need to solve along with the trust spanning layer. It's identifiers, because identifiers are really sort of the virtual address of these endpoints, and how we enable them to actually be able to do all this. It's a strong, very strong sense of identifier. So together, that forms the layer 2. Let me get back to Judith.
Thank you. So that gives kind of why we're doing it in a layered approach with the trust spanning layer, allowing for the other trust tasks and trust support to be done at other layers. Drummond, one of the things that we definitely will need, especially in an ecosystem of ecosystems, is the ability to have trust registries. Now, we know that each jurisdiction is going to want to have their own trust registry and have their formats. But in order to get to ecosystems of ecosystems, our trust registry task force focused first on a protocol called the Trust Registry Query Protocol. Can you just kind of highlight the Trust Registry Query Protocol and how it enables various trust registries to play in a large internet scale ecosystem of ecosystem structure?
Sure, Judith. As Wenjing was just explaining, when you've got these strong verifiable identifiers, cryptographically verifiable identifiers, and layer 2 can establish that cryptographically secure connection, then as you're dealing either within or across a digital trust ecosystem as one of those actors, and you want to perform one of these trust tasks, you almost always need to know something more about the other party you're dealing with, about who or what is behind that other identifier and what they are authorized to do in that ecosystem. A classic example, if we use credential exchange, is to say, oh, I'm a party, a relying party, for instance, a university. No, actually, I'm going to use the employer. And you as a student are showing up with a credential, an educational credential that's been issued to you by a university. How am I, as an employer, supposed to know that that is a legitimate credential from a legitimate university? It's not my job as an employer, let's say a manufacturer, to know all the universities in the world and all the degree types that are out there. How can my software quickly figure out, oh, that credential was actually issued from an accredited university in an ecosystem where I, can trust what's happening there. So that's an example of the types of queries. There are thousands of different examples of why you would need to be able to query a trust registry for an ecosystem. The defining characteristic of almost any ecosystem is that the trust registry will maintain that information. There's an analogy today. If you want to deal with a website or an internet domain out there, you're resolving names through their DNS name server to find out what IP addresses you're going to deal with. Trust registries are analogous to, again, at a higher layer, at the next higher layer, saying, I have a verifiable identifier for a party in your ecosystem. I need to know what they're authorized to do. And those queries, as you can see here, take that form. Does that entity for which I have the identifier have the authorization under your governance framework to do whatever they're asking, issue a particular credential, make a particular type of verification request, so you can ensure that the actors in that ecosystem are not asking for information that they should not be asking for. There are many other examples, but that's the role of a trust registry. And we need a highly scalable trust registry query protocol, just like we needed a highly scalable domain name query protocol with the DNS system. We believe there will eventually be almost as many trust registries as there are domain name servers out there. So that's why we have focused on this protocol. And it is also in the second generation implementers draft being implemented right now, because ecosystems are starting to need and demand this.
Right. So do you want to move to the next slide?
Oh, yes, that's right. We have, so it's important to clarify the trust query protocol is a standard way to make a query of any authoritative source system. Now, if you have systems that natively are built to support it, that's very easy. But there are many authoritative sources out there for this information today. OpenID systems and OpenID Federation is another system that could be queried. At the Decentralized Identity Foundation, they have a way of encapsulating the trust registry information for an ecosystem in a single file. They call it the trust establishment file. So that can be delivered over the TRQP. And then, of course, you can bridge to any other systems in particularly blockchains like the EU, EIDAS, the EBSI system in Europe, or their trusted list system. Every member state in Europe has a trusted list, and the train protocol is also popular in Europe. Those systems can also be bridged to answer TRQP's queries. So again, we're all about simplicity and scalability for answering these kinds of trust verification questions that will be essential across ecosystems. So I think that covers the trustworthy query protocol, Judith.
Thank you. And for those of you that want to find out more information about this, on our website, we have blogs on both the TSP, which I see that Drummond has put in the chat, as well as a blog post on the TRQP, Trust Registry Query Protocol, when they were released last spring. So now if you'll move forward, Drummond, we're going to switch the sides just very shortly to our governance cycle. And with the governance cycle, I'm just going to do this at a very high level. As he said, it is something that is continuous. It's not like a protocol. You write the protocol once and then you implement against that protocol. With a governance cycle, it always starts with risk assessment. And based on the risk assessment, you decide what level of security you want. Obviously, there's always a trade-off between ease of use and how secure it needs. So during that risk assessment, you'll make those determinations. Then you create your governance requirements. What are the documents and things that you want to document and say, this is what we're requiring? By creating a good set of governance documents, you then can do trust assurance by having auditors, certification processes, etc. But it doesn't end there. You want to also always be monitoring for residual risk and then readjusting the governance cycle. So we're not going to go into this whole side of the stack in detail in this webinar. We will do a future webinar on the governance side of our stack for those that are interested in doing that. But what I would like to do is just ask the person who actually used our governance meta model for the creation of a very elaborate set of governance documents. Karla Gleif used the ToIP meta model to create its governance framework for the verifiable legal entity identifiers, known as VLEIs, for organizational identity. And more importantly, can you explain why organization identity is so important and how it links to role identity within the organization? So talk a little bit about creating the documents, but more importantly, why this organizational identity plays a role in combating deepfakes.
So thank you, Judith. So with Gleif as one of the founding members of Trust over IP, I was glad to be able to rely upon and participate in the development of some of the Trust over IP ecosystem governance framework meta models, so that, as Judith mentioned, that the verifiable LEI or VLEI ecosystem governance framework could be created in full accordance with the standards and recommendations of the model. So the ecosystem governance framework itself defines the operational model and describes how the stakeholders within the ecosystem and infrastructure will qualify for and perform their roles and interface with the global LEI system. Just to conclude on this, there are 24 documents in the VLEI ecosystem governance framework, including multiples of some types of the documents. For example, there are 6 identifier and credential frameworks that define the credentials that we use, one of which Judith has on the screen at this particular point in time, and also 3 instances of technical specifications. So when coming up with our idea in order to be able to leverage our legal entity identifier in this world of increased digital engagement, we took a look at how to be able to make the LEI more useful and also to make it verifiable in digital interactions and engagements. And so what we created and what we defined in the ecosystem governance framework are requirements in order to be able to cryptographically bind a company's identifier, an organization's identifier, to its LEI, so that we could rely upon all of the requirements of qualifying for an LEI by the entity that has applied in order to be able to get it, including validating that the entity actually exists and certain reference data about that particular entity. And then using certain technical protocols, including change credentials of what you see here, we establish this chain of trust, which is on the screen now, with Glyph being the root of trust, being the entity that is already very, very strong on governance, being under regulatory oversight and having been established under regulatory oversight in order to be able to oversee the repository of the LEIs and their reference data. And then to chain this delegation down to a network of partners called qualified VLEI issuers who actually engage with holders of LEIs in order to be able to issue an organizational identity level credential to organizations, establishing a platform on which they could then further delegate for the first time in a verifiable chained way authority down to their officers and employees. And so what you see on the right-hand side of the screen is a depiction of how we use what we call role credentials or role VLEIs in order to be able to establish in a credential form that can be verified an organization represented by its legal entity identifier, a person identified within that organization or engaging with that organization in order to specify in what context and in what role, whether it be an official or a functional role, which they're representing that organization or engaging with that organization or acting on behalf of that organization, and can present that credential in a signing capacity. This could be authenticated and verified. And also the third use case in which we're looking to be able to apply this concept of organizational identities in the area of permissioning.
Oops.
Thank you, Karla. So that gives one example of where the trust over IP technologies have been being used, both on, and this is both on the technology side, using some of the technical specifications developed in our technical stack working group, and also using the governance meta model that was developed in our governance stack working group. I know this has been just a very quick webinar at this point in time. We will come back and do some more deep dives on specific parts of the trust over IP stack and protocols and governance framework. But what I would like to do now is open it up to the audience for any questions you may have. I will say, if there is a specific topic that you would like to see further webinars on, please do let Tomas know or me know, and we will get those scheduled coming up. And so let's open it up to questions. You can either use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen here, or you can just put it in chat and we will answer it directly.
Right. Thank you so much, everyone, for this very interesting content. I don't see any questions on the live streams either. But yes, as Judith says, feel free to raise your hand or use the chat or Q&A box to ask any questions.
While we're waiting, I'm going to ask one because it just came up in a Trust OP meeting this morning. Karla, I understand there's news about adoption of VLEIs that seem to be fairly significant. Can you just share a highlight of some recent news about VLEI adoption?
So at this particular point, we're most heavily involved with a pilot with one of the European regulators that was stood up after the global financial crisis. It's called the European Banking Authority, and they are piloting as part of the pilot. They are determining whether using VLEIs could be useful in being able to sign submissions from banks who are looking to be able required to be able to file Pillar 3 sustainability reports starting in 2025, and then to further leverage the usage and the use cases offered by the VLEI to be able to verify the status of the credential that's been signed, whether it's active or revoked, to verify the signature, and then also using the LEI and parsing it out of the credential to confirm that it's a bank that the EBA planned to hear from for Pillar 3 reporting. And then finally, that last use case of permissioning to let it into the system so that this authority could then evaluate and look at the data that's been sent.
Pretty significant when banks start getting serious about verifiable data like that.
So are there any other questions from the audience? If not, I have one for Wenjing. Well, actually, two for Wenjing. So, Wenjing, you are the chair of the AI and the Metaverse Task Force here at Trust Over IP. And if people want to get involved in the AI and Metaverse Task Force, can you talk a little bit about some of the work they're working on? It's mainly been research and finding information, and they're working on a white paper right now. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then a follow-on question with regards to the TSP, which you have given the very high level of the TSP here. But I know that there has been a reference implementation created at Open Wallet and how people might be able to get involved in either using or testing or playing with or continuing the development of the TSP at the Open Wallet Foundation, which is a sister project here at Linux Foundation, and where a lot of the code development is being done.
Sure, yeah. So I'm the way I'm thinking is how these protocols, concepts can actually use and solve problems. So as we using the lead example in this webinar, right? I would imagine a corporation using remote meeting software would be able to, for example, adopt VLEI as a identifier for the key managers, executives have approving power in the corporation, so that when we are in a remote meeting like this, that this verification can happen automatically, right? Behind the scenes, the tools, the applications would be able to do all that and show up as a, for example, an icon, a logo that will show that, yes, this attendant, their software and their authentication status is easily and intuitively visible to all the attendants. Because that's the level of integration we're going to need to see to actually solve a problem like this. And I think the Trust over IP's protocols and the stack and a strong authentic identifier like a VLEI provide those tools. So it's now readily available that we are able to then go really imagine applications. And so one of the areas that the AI Metaverse Task Force been talking about is how do we integrate that with other content authenticity applications so that we have, person's identity. These people attending the Zoom conference is the real Drummond I know, and the real Judith. That's one level. The second is that any content, videos, and other things, right? Data we share may not be in purely interactive. Would also have the similar kind of the credentials associated with it. So there's a sister organization called C2PA working on that, and a lot of the AI companies around the world, the largest, I think Google, Meta, OpenAI all have publicly announced that they will be supporting the same standards. So those would allow us to have a content or a data structure that is authenticated and known to be trustworthy. So combining the two is a very interesting and seems like obvious solution for us. And so we had a presentation in the recent IAW, and that allowed us to really start to imagining that I can build a new, maybe messaging, but also video conferencing application that has all these components built into it. And that will be really wonderful to see. And I hope that will be, a good way, example of, maybe concluding this webinar.
Thank you very much. That's a perfect conclusion. And Drummond, if you can put to the next slide up, I really want to thank everybody for attending. And as you can hear, Trust Over IP is a standards development organization. We write standards, guides, etc. And we partner with other organizations that are working within Linux Foundation, and specifically Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust umbrella organization. So if you are at all interested in getting more involved cross projects, I invite you to reach out to any one of these leaders at the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, or go to their website and find out what's going on, because none of us are going to create any of this in a vacuum. We have to reach across the aisle and work with our other projects. We're very closely working with C2PA, Content Authenticity Initiative, DIF, and other projects, Open Wallet Foundation, etc., at the Linux Foundation and beyond, because only as a full tribe can we solve the problem of deepfakes that is coming in front of us. And so with that, thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Tomas to close.
Yes, thank you very much, Judith, and thank you to all the panelists as well. So thank you, Drummond, thank you, Karla, and thank you, Wenjing. It was a really insightful discussion, and as you can see from the comments as well, thank you, Brett, and also thank you, Derek, to LinkedIn Live. And I agree with you, Derek. Derek wrote, by the way, that it's a great presentation and that we do need to have a deeper dive discussion, and I agree. And it's not the last you're hearing from the Trust Over IP, so stay tuned. We will announce more events in the future. With that, thank you again to the panelists, and thank you for everybody joining us live, as well as the ones people watching over YouTube and LinkedIn later. And just so you know that today's webinar was a little bit later than we usually have done, so a lot of our community was probably a little bit too late, but I know that they're often checking out our webinar channel, the YouTube, and they might come back to you with more information, questions as well. Now, before we leave, I would also like to invite you to join the future webinars as well as in-person events, and you can get all of the information of where to find those and when is that happening on our events page. Please also visit our meetup page to see the upcoming meetups and to register for them. And when you get a presentation from this webinar with the slides, this is all linked, so you can follow this link to visit the meetup page. I would also like to invite you to join our Discord community and explore the channels related to the project, special interest groups, regional chapters, and much more. And there's a lot of real-time interaction going on there. It's really the best way to get your questions answered quickly. And for those of you interested in corporate membership, please don't forget to get in touch with us at ecosystem@lfdecentralizedtrust.org. Again, thank you everybody for watching, and if you have any questions that you would like answered, please feel free to reach out to our ecosystem team or the Trust over IP directly. And thank you again to our panelists and to everybody watching, and see you again next time.
Thanks, Tomas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.